Hi everyone, it's day one of the Doodle School Free Motion Doodle Challenge, and the prompt for today is lines. I thought I would show you how I would use lines to make block letters if I were trying to free motion quilt them onto a quilt. So first I want to show you how I would do them in sashing, and then I'll show you how I would combine them with swirls to make a background fill. So if I were marking the sashing on a quilt to put letters in it, I would probably use a water-soluble pen. This one has blue ink, and if you spray water on it after you've marked something, it disappears. This is my favorite marking tool for most things that I do with free motion quilting. So I've already marked my page as if I had rows of sashing on it, and also I've marked some guidelines. So if I were doing this on a quilt, I might mark halfway between the bottom seam and the top seam of my sashing, and then this is a 1.5 inch sashing. So you want to make sure that your letters are taller than they are wide. Square letters don't look right, so I put marks at every inch along what would be a sashing. And if you want to, you can even draw a line every inch. The lines will help you space your letters apart from each other. I did that for the first 3 letters, and then for the rest I'm just going to use these marks to guide me. I like to make as few marks as possible just because then you have less to take off when you're done with your quilting. So since today is lines, I'm going to use lines to make my letters, and I'll just start with A. So you can use your ruler for this if you want to, and actually I'm going to use a black pen so that you can see it against my guidelines. You can use your ruler if you want to. I'm just going to go ahead and let this be imperfect, let it be a little wonky. So for A, I'm going to just start right inside these 2 marks, draw a diagonal line kind of headed toward the center of the top seam, but I want to have a little bit of a squared off top instead of a pointy top. So I draw a little line across that top seam and then come back down. So that's the top part of my A. So these are block letters. I'm going to draw a line across my bottom seam. So if this were on a quilt, you could either stitch in the ditch or you could come just a little bit above the ditch, which is your seam. So now I will just echo my first diagonal line, and I'm going to use this center line to guide me for where I put the line that would cross the center of the A. Go up and then back down. Now I am lifting my pen up from the paper. If you were quilting this, you wouldn't be lifting up your needle and ending your lines. So from here on, I am going to try to keep my pen down unless I need to stretch out my hand or something. Okay, so this is where I ended right here, and if you can follow your seam right here and stitch in the ditch, your stitches down here will be harder to see. So that's one reason I like to stitch in the ditch, but if you want this line to be seen, you would come up a little bit above that when you're forming your letter. I don't mind if my top and my bottom lines go in the ditch just a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go up for my B. So there are some letters that have curves on them, and that's a little hard to do with a straight line, but you can mimic a curve by doing a diagonal line. So I'm going to do that, and then a short vertical line and another diagonal line, and do the same thing for the bottom of the B. And then I want to get inside it, so there's really no other way to do that other than drawing a line into the inside. So you have to just accept that some lines that you maybe don't necessarily want there, that aren't and I would then trace that line back. I was a little sloppy there. That's okay. You kind of have to accept that in order to travel inside your letters, there will be lines there that wouldn't normally be there in letters, but that's all right. The I reads it as a B. So now I'm going to make a curved C by doing a diagonal line, then a long line up, another diagonal line, and go like that. And about right where I did it on the top, I try to just kind of mimic that on the inside. So you can see this is kind of sloppy, but that's why we're doodling. We're doodling to practice, and as you practice, you'll get better. Now, let me show you kind of how I would do this if I were using a ruler. I would just kind of line up the ruler for every step, and you can measure every part, but to me, using a ruler already kind of slows me down, and measuring each part would slow me down even more. So unless you really want perfection, I don't think that's necessary. So now I need to go into the inside to make that hole inside the D. Okay. So for the rest of the letters, I'm going to speed up the video so that you don't have to watch this for a half hour, and you can just see how I form the rest of them. Okay, so that's A through Z. What I'm going to do this time, I've already practiced making the letters, so now I pretty much know how to make their shapes. I'm going to form them every which way on this page and include swirls to fill in the gaps between the letters. So I'll just start with A. Now I want to travel to another area, so I'm going to make a swirl. Now we haven't come to swirls in the Doodle challenge yet, so maybe you might want to wait to try this until you have actually had some practice with swirls, until we've given you a few tips, or you can give it a shot right now if you'd like to. Now, one thing I could have done when I was forming this inside part here is just put like a curved line in it as if a swirl were coming through. So I'm going to try to remember that in the future as I make my letters so that I don't have to come back and do that later. This is totally random as far as where you place the swirls, except for you do want to kind of start moving in the general direction of the areas that you need to fill up. And my letters, I'm keeping them roughly the same size as each other, but I don't have to. I could vary them randomly just to see the effect. This is you know, this is your time for experimenting while you're doodling. So I might even do that. Okay, so I kind of like the effect of having them be various sizes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make most of them smaller because I don't have a big enough page to make a lot of big letters. But I am going to make a few of them big like that D and try to space the big ones out. Maybe have one over here, one over here, one over here. All right, so this is what I ended up with. And I've actually gone ahead and made some notes on my doodle. So I made notes of things that I want to improve next time. A few things that I wrote down were I want to remember to fill in the centers of my letters before I travel back outside. I want to travel along my previous lines more neatly, so just be a little more careful about that. And I wrote that I want to pay attention to the lines I use for travel lines. If I use the same line too often, it ends up being much darker than the surrounding lines and it pops out at you in a bad way. But I also had some ideas and some things that I liked. So one idea I had was I could actually intentionally go around the letters more than once so that they do pop out a little bit more. I also like that I used the large and the small letters. I think it creates a nice sense of depth where you feel like the larger letters are closer to you and the smaller letters are farther away. So just write a little note to myself there. So you can just write whatever notes you want, and then when you come back to this and you think, I really think I want to use this on a quilt, you might practice doodling it maybe 1 or 2 more times and try to focus on these things that you wanted to improve or try out something new that you wanted to do, and then you're ready to put it onto a quilt.